The Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures, is the most incredible document that the world possesses. It is what the Creator of all existence has revealed to us through His prophets. And while every single word is precious, when it comes to practically speaking, some passages are obviously more relevant than others. For example, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, the very famous passage, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. What an incredibly important statement. Or from Leviticus chapter 19, where it speaks about V'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha, you shall love your fellow as yourself. These are towering passages. And when you compare them to, for example, a passage like Genesis chapter 5, verse 31, which says, the years of Lemach came to 777 years, and he died. We have numerous passages in the Bible, chapters of begats, and chapters telling you how long people lived. And again, spiritually speaking, every word, every letter of the Bible, of the Torah, of the Scriptures is precious. But practically speaking, we have to be able to differentiate between those passages which impact our lives in a practical, real, down-to-earth way, and those passages which are not, at least on the surface, so evidently relevant. And this is why it is so fascinating that many people seem to be more drawn to that which is obscure and bizarre in the Bible than to its more vital teachings. For example, tefillin, phylacteries, the leather boxes that the Torah requires that are worn on our arm and on our head. The Torah mentions this commandment several times. For example, it mentions them in Exodus chapter 13 and in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And yet a Google search for tefillin revealed slightly more than 1 million results. However, Genesis chapter 6 contains a very obscure passage about mysterious beings called Nephilim. And Google turned up over 6 million results in searches for this. I find that puzzling. Why does the obscure and the bizarre and the mysterious attract so much more attention than passages in the Bible that directly affect our lives? Now, the mention of these Nephilim appear in a cryptic passage in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. And I'm going to read the passage, and we're going to have to unpack it. And it came to pass, when man commenced to multiply upon the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the B'nai Elohim saw the daughters of man when they were beautifying themselves, and they took them for themselves, wives from whomever they chose. And the Lord said, let my spirit not quarrel forever concerning man, because he is also just flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the B'nai Elohim would come to the daughters of man, and they would bear for them, they are the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Now, obviously, this is not a simple passage. And aside from mentioning generic, regular men and women, the passage identifies two other characters that we're going to need to identify. We find reference to B'nai Elohim, which we will discuss, and to Nephilim. At this point, we really don't know who these beings are. And we also need to consider whether these are equivalent terms for the same character, or are they referring to different groups of people? So let's begin with the B'nai Elohim, who took whatever women they desired. Now, this could be translated, B'nai Elohim, as the sons of God. But it is most certainly not referring to junior gods. The Torah is quite clear that God is one and that there is only one God. The Torah often refers to special humans as God's children or God's sons. For example, in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 1, it speaks about you are the sons, you are the children of the Lord your God. Or Exodus chapter 4, verse 22, speaking about Israel. It says, Israel is my son, God says. Israel is my son, my firstborn. Or in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 14, where God speaks about Solomon as his son. But there's no implication in any of these passages of divinity. It's simply a term that ascribes a special status, an elevated status, to these human beings. Now, the word Elohim does not only refer to God. It often does, but it doesn't only refer to God. It is a form of the word El. And El means power in Hebrew. For example, we see in Genesis chapter 31, verse 29, where Lavan, after he pursues Jacob and finally catches up with him, he says, Yesh be'el yadi, I have it within the power of my hand to do you harm. Obviously, he's not saying that he has God in his hand. Yesh li be'el yadi. El is the word for power. So in the Torah, Elohim can be used for any powerful being or someone or some group in a position of authority. For example, God tells Moses that he will be an Elohim over his brother Aaron. We find this in the beginning of the book of Exodus, chapter 4, verse 16. Or God says to Moses, you will be an Elohim over Pharaoh in chapter 7, verse 1. Later in the book of Exodus, we find that the term Elohim is applied to judges, a court. So we see this in Exodus chapter 21, verse 6, and in Exodus chapter 22, verse 7. These are human beings in positions of power and authority, and so they're called Elohim. And then we sometimes find Elohim as a term for powerful spiritual beings, like angels. So, for example, in the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 6, it speaks about the angels as the B'nai Elohim. The B'nai Elohim, the children of power, the children of might, children or those that have power and might. Now, the term Nephilim, the second term that we're concerned with, derives from the Hebrew word meaning fallen. Fallen. And we'll have to understand in what sense, in what way, these people are fallen. Alternatively, Nephilim may derive from the Hebrew word nifla, which means wondrous. And some assume, some commentaries maintain, that this refers to their wondrous stature, that they were giants. And when we see in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, when the spies reported about what they found in the land of Israel, that back then called Canaan, they mention seeing Nephilim, which they describe as giants. So some combine both of these meanings and say that people's hearts would fall when they saw these colossal giants. Now, with this background, we can begin to untangle our difficult passage in Genesis chapter 6. The first and most simple, straightforward approach, which is really based upon a fairly literal translation of the passage, is that it's referring to Bnei Elohim, who are sons of human princes, noblemen, judges, or sons of powerful people, privileged people, who forcibly took whoever they desired as wives. It's simple as that. These are powerful people and their sons, right? Spoiled, powerful kids. And they figured, I'll just grab whoever I want. What's not clear is whether the term Nephilim refers to these Bnei Elohim after they have fallen and become corrupted, meaning that they don't necessarily start off as corrupted, but we know that power corrupts. And so it's possible that when later on the passage here speaks about Nephilim, it could be referring to these same Bnei Elohim, but after they became corrupted, or it may be speaking of the children of the Bnei Elohim, meaning that when these Bnei Elohim, these children of the powerful, took these wives and had children, so these children might have been referred to as Nephilim. It's not entirely clear. The continuation of this passage in Genesis chapter 6 shows that it was this kind of corruption, and in addition to many other kinds of sins, that ultimately led God to destroying the world with a flood. That is the simple and straightforward approach to understanding this passage. It's not that mysterious at the end of the day. On the other hand, there is a view of the Midrash that the Bnei Elohim here are actual angels. And the account that's told in the Midrashim, in the various accounts of the rabbis, is that when they heard God was planning to destroy the world, they said to God, well, of course, man certainly should never have been created. God then confronted these two angels. The Midrash identifies them in some versions as Shemchazai and Azael. And God confronts them and says, well, if not for man, what purpose does the universe serve? And the angels said to God, we are sufficient reason for its existence. So God says back to the angels, well, I know that if you were to dwell on earth and possess evil inclinations as men do, you'd be even worse than they are. And the angel said to God, give us permission to live among mortals, and you will see how we will sanctify your name. So God said to them, go down, descend, and do as you suggest. Shemchazai and Azael lived on earth as human beings, but they couldn't resist the temptations to sin when they saw the beautiful daughters of men. Now, in terms of Nephilim, some say that this is simply another term used for the Bnei Elohim, for these angels, after God told them to descend. After all, Nephilim means those who descended. So one approach says that the passage begins by describing them, the angels, as Bnei Elohim, a term for angels, and then it later refers to them as the Nephilim because they had descended from heaven. Another view maintains that it's the offspring, that these angels and the women that they took produced, who are called Nephilim. And these would be the giants that we later encounter in the Bible. But it's important to understand that this is not a story of fallen angels who rebel against God. In point of fact, it is very clear when you study the Midrash that God sent them down into the world knowing full well that they would end up sinning. And God wanted to prove this to them. And they didn't sin as actual angels. This only happened to them when they assumed human form and having to deal with an evil inclination. They were now no longer angels who simply act as computers. Angels normally are like a computer. You program them, they do whatever you program. God sent them down now to live as human beings that had evil inclinations, which means they had free will to a degree. And it's this that led to their sinning. These are not angels in the normal sense of the word who rebel against God, and that's an impossibility in terms of the Torah.